welcome to the Wayfaring Panda. Today I'm participating in a YouTube hop by Handmade Happiness, and our theme today is mixed media, so I'm going to be making this bee theme card. So first of all, I started with an embossing folder from the Paper Studio, that's a honeycomb, and then I'm putting wild honey distress ink on it, and the paper I'm using is a Bristol Smooth. I ended up liking the panel that I did before the filming, so I'm going to use that one instead. And the only thing I did different is I put the ink on the opposite side of the embossing folder than the one in the video. I'm also going over distress ink, and I'm using Fossilized amber. Originally, I wanted to do a double embossing technique, which is where I was going to use VersaFine on it and then heat emboss with black embossing powder, and then I was going to go over it with my wild honey distress ink, but I couldn't get it to work correctly, so I'm doing it this way. In order to do mixed media, I'm going to be using soda cans to do my bees instead of paper. I had this idea when I originally got into doing die cutting. That's really the reason I first got my die cut machine. And I was going to make these and make napkin rings out of them, but I never got around to doing that. So I thought this would be a great time to use my bee die. And I've been saving soda cans to use with my die cutting machine, so here we're going to go ahead and try it. So first of all, I'm using my Holtz scissors to cut open the soda can. I'm cutting off the ends. Now I'm cutting off the rough part of it. I used a brayer to try to get it to stop curling, which it got it some of the way, but it's hard to get it all the way flat. But as long as you get it from curling as much, you can run it through your die cut machine. The aluminum from soda cans is thin enough that you can use your regular die cutting machine and plate and also use thin type dies. So the ones I'm using is a bee from Cottage Cutz, which is Bumblebee Mini, and then I'm using some Sizzix Triplits Dies from Stephanie Bernard, which are flowers. You may have to go over the die cutting machine twice, like run it through once and then go backwards in order to get them out. I did have trouble getting the antenna out of the bee because it was kind of small, but eventually after I worked with it a little bit, I was able to get it out. In order to color the bee, I use my alcohol markers because the alcohol ink will stick to the aluminum. And so I started with Y38, and then I also used W9 to color the antenna and the head. I had to go over it a couple times to get it to color good. I'm sorry I kept getting out of the camera range. I zoomed in quite a bit, and then since my hands are messy, I didn't want to touch the camera. I need to get one of those setups where you can see what you're doing and what's on camera as you work. I'm using the Y38 on the wings and going over that several times. On the flowers, I used Holtz alcohol ink, and I used two different methods. I squirted it on a cotton ball and then rubbed it on the flowers. I had to go over several times, and sometimes I just squirted it directly on and then kind of pounced it with the cotton ball, which kind of gave it a little bit more textured look. And the colors I'm using is honeycomb, butterscotch, and sunset orange, which is the orange color. Now I'm doing the sentiment for the card, so I'm using some regular white cardstock that I cut in a rectangle, and then I cut a black one just a little bit bigger. And then I found this sentiment that I had from some old Stampin' Up sets. So first of all, I went over the paper with my embossing tool, which is a powder, to keep the embossing powder from sticking to anything except the ink. Then I stamped it with Versamark ink. And then I'm using this Recollections black embossing powder, which I really don't like. It's really hard to get it off of the areas. Like there's a little few spots that I can't get it off. I did use a brush, as you see here, but you can't really see in the close-ups, but there are some little spots and specks where the black shows up. So I like using the clear embossing powder better over colored ink, because then if it's on the paper you don't really notice it. Then I'm going over the sentiment with my heat tool until the plastic from the embossing powder is melted. So the words on this card, the saying was, "Pleasant words are as honeycomb, sweet to the soul." Proverbs 15:24. I thought that was appropriate for the bee card. Then I'm using an old Marvy paper punch to punch the corners. I don't have any fancy shape dies to do my sentiments, so I thought this would make it look nice. Then I used my Scotch ATG to go over the back to attach the white cardstock to the black. To assemble the bee and the flowers, I used some E6000 glue, because you need really tacky glue that'll hold metal. The only problem with this, it's not quite like that super glue, but it is extremely sticky, so you want to be sure to keep it off of yourself. I used a coffee filter to keep the glue in, and a brush. And you just want to use a cheap brush, because you'll probably might have to throw it away. And as you can see, it's sticking to my hands. You can also use gloves. It'll eventually wear off of your hands if you get any glue on you. And I try to use a white wipe to wipe off the front, because I did get some glue sticking to the front of the flowers. One thing that I found out while working with the alcohol ink is that it did stain my mat. But of course, that's the whole point of having a mat, is to protect your table. But I'm thinking of getting the glass mat, and I'm wondering how that works with the alcohol ink. Now, one thing I also noticed with the E6000 glue and the aluminum, you do have a little bit of wiggle room where you can kind of slide the flowers around to get them just where you want. Although then I ended up getting some glue on the front of the flowers because it starts sticking to your fingers. I used the E6000 glue with a paintbrush again to attach the flowers to the card. And then I let it dry for several hours before I finished the card. Well, honeybees are a very important animal because, of course, I do like honey. They pollinate. And the pollinators, which includes honeybees, and there's like, I don't know how many, there's way more than 500 types of bees. I forget exactly how many that there are. A lot of them don't make honey, but they all pollinate, as well as a lot of butterflies and some other insects. And without them, we would have less than 50% of our food supply that we have now. After the glue dried, I used a hole punch to go through the middle of the flowers and added a brad, and it had different colors. So I used kind of a gold color, and there was a copper color I'd used on the orange flower. I hope you learn a lot on this mixed media video hop. I know I don't work with mixed media very much, so I'm anxious to see what else everyone else does, and to learn some more. And please support myself and all the other YouTube creators on the blog hop by subscribing to our channels, liking the videos, and commenting. That helps us to move up in YouTube's algorithms to help us get more views. And some of us are not monetized and have small channels, so that will help us grow and eventually get monetized. You can also help them out by using the links below to the different products. It doesn't cost you anything, but it does help each of us by giving us commissions on any sales that our links generate. And to finish up the card, I mounted it on this black cardstock, and then I mounted it, the whole thing, to a blank card. To see the next video on the hop, just click the link in the description below.